Sounds good.
So Amelia, what do you want to get out of this conversation?
I would like to get out of this conversation not a full plan for an upcoming in-service that I have on October 12th, but a little more direction in pulling together my many priorities for my staff right now. So narrowing my focus for a whole day that I get with my people in a couple of weeks.
Well, if I had to bet money, I'd say you've already been thinking about this quite a lot. What have you come up with already?
So there are a few big topics that feel like they're at top of mind for people. And it feels a little like we're pulled in a few directions. So that's what I feel like I need help with. One is that the district has this expectation for us, and I think we have it for ourselves, to be ready to go remote if that happens. And teachers have expressed a lot of like interest in having more professional development around like classroom and Seesaw and how to integrate them and how to do effective lessons on there. But we're not going remote anytime soon. And if anything, we just moved like to a slightly more relaxed stage around here. So I think people feel like overwhelmed by the idea of doing that work, but also kind of they feel like they need a lot of help. So that's one topic. But I really want to do some work around ELA because there's a clear, a lot of reasons. Our beginning of the year reading data for kids, elementary school kids after the closure, shows that they need a lot. And it's been kind of a disjointed area of curriculum for the school. And I have some EL education coaching PD money this year to use. So like that's one possibility, is to spend part of that day on that. And then I really want to keep, whenever I can, moving forward on some SEL stuff and some anti-racism stuff for teachers. And so I'm having a hard time prioritizing those four big buckets of work and you know, wanting people to feel some coherence.
Okay. So it's really 1, 2, 3, 4 possibilities.
Yeah.
And you're thinking it's a day?
Well, I mean, this work is like ongoing. So I have a staff meeting next Tuesday, but then we only have these in-service days every couple months. So having a full day, like one of my rare full days, is coming up. So I'm just trying to use that to the best that it's worth. So not really meaning that I'm going to do all 4 of those things that day, but I'm trying to prioritize what needs to happen right now.
Okay, so you mentioned coherence.
Yeah.
You mentioned teacher interest. And you mentioned money. Do any of those things factor into the way you make this decision?
Yes. Money, not really. I mean, like I have the money I need to do the ELA work that I want to do. Teacher interest, I think there's interest in all of those things. And maybe a different way of thinking about interest is like, okay, I think you've been writing about this a lot, Isabel, that like people's sense of motivation being connected to their sense of competence. So maybe it's worth focusing on something that they are interested in doing more, but also there's a high potential for them to feel effective at, and it's still an area of need. And in that, I think they would probably leave from that day feeling a lot more productive if we spent a lot of it on ELA, because I think they bring a lot of skills to the table as reading teachers, and it's something that they care a lot about, and it's something that with some dedicated time toward, they could probably walk away feeling like they accomplished a lot.
So it's more about teacher agency than it is about teacher interest.
Yeah, I think that's a better reframe. Because there's a lot of interest. There's like this weird kind of, I don't know what to call it. I guess it feels like anxiety around the tech tools. I think maybe the word is pressure. They feel a lot of pressure to do that, but they don't, and they want to do it well, but it feels really overwhelming to them. And maybe there's a way to like model some pieces of, I don't know, posting a lesson in Classroom where the work is then plugged into the Seesaw portfolio. It's just kind of embedded as a model in something more ELA focused that we're doing, so that they can get a glimpse of it and see it working, but it's not the focus.
Okay, so talk about the other options, the SEL and the anti-racism.
Yeah, I'm a little bit stuck about where to go with SEL. It turns, so we have Second Step in our school, and people have been using it for a long time, but it turns out that from a couple sessions I did during our in-service weeks, that people are pretty new to the CASTLE framework and to the actual like specific skills. So with all the guidance this summer about how important that is right now, I was taking it pretty seriously to offer kind of more of the background about what those skills really are, so that they kind of understand the why behind Second Step, in hopes that that was gonna help them prioritize those lessons and then see the benefit in students. And I've been thinking about that as kind of like a good mini inquiry introduction, maybe, because it's a potentially pretty easy thing to identify, like what the student data would be that would show us that it was working. Like it could be a pretty narrow focus around a few skills. So I've been wanting to spend some time on that in the somewhat near future. And then the anti-racism piece continues to unfold. The district has this anti-racism policy now, and the elementary principals are working together on how we want to roll out PD in our schools. But I also have the green light now to just get going too. And there's a lot of my staff who are really interested in doing more. So 4 of them, 3 of whom are on my leadership team, are going to the EL Education virtual conference later in October. That's going to have a big focus on racial justice. So as much as I really hate waiting on that one, it might be pretty useful to let those 3 people have that experience and then bring that back to the leadership team to dive into more in, say, November or December at our next, whatever next staff meeting is after they go to that.
Okay, so you've talked a lot about these 4 things. So now that you've had the chance to process out loud, what did you hear yourself say?
I heard myself say, do lean on my leadership team, figure out what can be done through inquiry, even if it's kind of like mini inquiry. And probably focus most on ELA right now because it's a place where people can feel some agency. And maybe I keep biting off little chunks of the SEL work as kind of an ongoing inquiry that can keep happening in staff meetings, which are, after school, like hour and a half. So maybe for this date on October 12th, I really put energy into planning around what our work in ELA is going to be, which also could be on kind of an inquiry model. I didn't build, but I started filling in a version of your strategy map for that with my leadership team last week when we met, which was a lot to introduce, but I think they had some good initial understanding of what that process could do for us as far as helping us identify an area of focus and dig deeper to understand it.
So talk to me about what you mean by lean on leadership team.
That's a good question. I mean, what do I mean by that? Well, I think I'd like your help with what I mean by that, but some initial thoughts are like, have that be a place to do some of the thinking and planning around what's going to be useful to staff, but also have them bring what they know and are learning, forward to then figure out how best to share that with staff, like whether it's staff meetings that are at the right time, whether kind of like, I don't know how to express what I'm thinking really. Do you have any good ideas for me?
Well, it's just immediately comes to mind that you're just fuzzy on the whole issue of a leadership team.
Yeah. I'm struggling with leadership team. It feels like, so they only have met once a month for an hour. And I really want there to be this group that like digs into data about kids and what they're learning and how they're doing, and decides together what our next steps are. But it feels like the ask on them is like there's just not that time. And so I'm a little bit struggling with how to make that a meaningful, I don't know, like to have something better than like a consent agenda with them.
Okay, so I am parking this idea of the leadership team. I am noting, right, that that's something that you want to explore and you need some help thinking that through that. Where are you? Where are you with the professional learning planning?
Like right this second, where am I?
Yeah. So like we've got 2 minutes. So what are your next steps now that you've heard all this? So I didn't really ask you a lot of questions because you already were going through this whole cost benefit analysis in your head for each of these.
Yeah.
Right? So you already have some kind of mental rubric that you're applying to this. Mm-hmm. Do you want me to tell you what your mental rubric is?
Yeah, I do.
So here's what you talked through. So the idea of inquiry came up several times.
Yep.
You mentioned that a lot. I think I've heard you talk about that before. So I think being able to embed that or use it as an organizing framework is clearly very important to you. You put most emphasis on the ELA because you said that you were concerned with the teacher's motivation attached to competence. And if they, you wanted them to feel better, and you thought they would feel better walking out of professional learning opportunity on ELA. You talked about, you used the language of letting those 3 people have that experience of going to that conference. And so I think you were highlighting I think you were advising yourself to hold a little bit until they'd had that chance and not to try and get ahead of that. And then I think you were looking at embedding the tech tools and the SEL. But the inquiry came up again.
Yeah, I think so. To answer your question of what my next steps are, I think my next steps are to start working on my agenda for that day with, like you said, inquiry as even in the ELA stuff, kind of an organizing frame. I also think a big piece of the teacher agency is them working in their teams and having time to collaborate. That's going to help them like walk away with some sense of being productive. And yeah, so I have a good idea of how to begin to structure that day. And in what you're saying back, I'm also hearing that maybe a seed for our future conversations about leadership team is the idea of using that as a place where people do some common learning together, like those 3 are going to do at the conference, but more like for the full team.
Okay, I have that written down.
Thank you.
All right, so I know that there's still more work to do on this, but I am confident that you will be able to take at least a couple of steps from this. Do you have any feedback for me?
There were a few questions you asked that I appreciate when you ask a very frank, direct question. That was helpful. And when we have more time, I like digging into the specifics and sharing screens and looking at tools together. But
okay, great.
Today's format does not so much allow for that.
Right. Okay. Good. It makes me feel good to hear you be able to kind of sort through how you might make that decision. So I think that's something that I want you to carry forward is, you know, you actually already have a good sense of how you might reach that decision. So I'm glad that you're getting the chance to process that and say it all out loud. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Isabel.